Your fence is 11 feet inside common ground, and the board has voted to have it removed at your expense. That was Lorna Keast, standing on my gravel in white sneakers, reading off a clipboard she held like a subpoena. She had pulled her sedan halfway onto my drive to do it. She did not say good morning. She did not ask my name, which she already had wrong on her notice, spelled with 2 N's where it takes one. She just told me my fence was a trespass and that the Ren Mesa Homeowners Association would be billing me for the bulldozer. I am Gus Renner. I am 58 years old. I am a licensed land surveyor, and I have been one for 31 years. I own 3¼ acres at the high end of a subdivision called Ren Mesa in the dry pine country east of Maddox County, where the pavement gives out and the real estate signs start promising views. My fence sits exactly where I built it, on the line I have known longer than anyone in that development has been alive to it. What Lorna did not know, standing there reading me my violations, was that I am the man who surveyed Ren Mesa. Before it had a name, before it had a board, before there was a single mailbox or a swimming pool, or a rule about the color of a front door, there was raw ground, and a developer and a young surveyor with a transit and a steel chain. I walked that whole tract. I set the monuments. I drew the plat that every deed in that subdivision is carved out of, including hers. My signature and my seal are on the map recorded at the county. Every lot line she thinks she is enforcing, I am the one who put it on paper. So when she told me my fence was in the wrong place, she was telling the wrong man. Let me ask you something, and be honest about it. If a stranger drove up your driveway, misspelled your name on a legal notice, and informed you that a committee had voted to demolish something you built with your own hands on your own ground, what would you have done? Most people would have argued. I have learned that arguing is the slowest thing you can do. I went inside, poured a cup of coffee, and opened a folder I had kept for 19 years. I want to tell this slow, because slow is how it happened, and slow is how it had to be answered. I bought my piece of Ren Mesa back when it was still mostly stakes and survey flagging. The developer who hired me to plat the tract liked my work, and when I told him I wanted the 3¼ acres at the top, the parcel with the granite outcrop and the long view down the valley, he sold it to me at cost. My wife was alive then. Her name was Nora. She stood on that outcrop the first evening we owned it, with the light going gold across the pines. And she said, this was where we would get old. We got 11 years instead of 40. Cancer is not patient the way land is patient. She is buried up the road in the little cemetery the founders set aside, which I also surveyed, because that is the kind of work a county surveyor does. I know where every line in that country is, including the one around her. After Nora, it was me and my daughter, also Nora, named for her mother, in a fit of grief and hope that I have never regretted. My daughter is 22 now. In her last year of an engineering program 2 hours away, home on the weekends she can manage. And it was me and the dog, a stout little blue heeler named Tilly, who thinks the gravel drive is hers and tells anyone who comes up it. For most of those years, Ren Mesa was a fine place to live. The board, when there was a board, fussed about trash cans and trailer parking and let the rest of us alone. Then, the lots at the bottom of the development sold out, and the new money came up the hill. And with the new money came Lorna Keast. She moved into the big stucco place near the entrance, the one with the columns that do not hold anything up. I watched the moving trucks go by one morning while I was changing the oil in my truck, 2 of them, and a third later for what turned out to be patio furniture and a fountain. Within a year, she was president of the association. She ran on a platform of property values, which is the word people use when they mean control. She held a candidate evening at the clubhouse with sparkling water in plastic flutes and a slide deck. And she talked about a vision for Ren Mesa. And the lower tier, the new arrivals voted for her in a block. The older residents, the ones who had been up the hill 20 years, did not bother to come. That was our mistake, and we paid for it slow. She put up a guardhouse at the entrance that guards nothing, a little peaked structure with a window, and no guard, because the budget never stretched to a person to sit in it. She hired a management company out of the city, a glass front outfit that sent letters on heavy paper with a logo embossed at the top, so that the unpleasant words never had to carry her own name. She formed an architectural review committee and seated it with her own people. And she began, one lot at a time, one notice at a time, to make Ren Mesa into the kind of place where a committee decides where your fence goes and a homeowner learns to ask permission to paint a door. 1. The first notice I got from her came on a Monday in the fall, and it was about my woodpile. It was stacked, the letter said, in a manner inconsistent with community aesthetic standards, and I had 14 days to bring it into compliance, or face a fine of $50 a week. I read it twice on the porch. The woodpile was 4 cords of split pine, seasoned, stacked tight against the north wall of my shed, the way every man in that country stacks wood who actually burns it. I moved it anyway. I moved it 10 feet to a spot you could not see from the road, because it was easier than arguing, and because I had wood to split and a winter coming. I noted the date. The notice came, and the date I complied, and I put both in a folder. That was the only part of my response that mattered, though I did not know it yet. The second notice came in December, and it was about Tilly, who had barked. The letter said, in excess of reasonable duration on multiple occasions. There was no log of when. There were no dates. There was just the assertion, on the heavy paper with the embossed logo, that my dog was a nuisance. Tilly barks at the propane truck and at deer and at Lorna's sedan when it slows on the road below, which is to say she barks at the things a heeler is bred to bark at. I let that one sit in the folder unanswered. You cannot comply with a complaint that has no facts in it. The third came in March, and it was the one that told me the woman did not check anything before she signed it. It was a fine $75 for an unapproved landscape feature installed without architectural review. The feature was the granite outcrop, the 40-ton dome of bedrock at the top of my property, the one Nora had stood on the first evening we owned the place, the one the whole mesa is named after, in a roundabout way. Lorna's committee had driven the upper road, seen a large rock, and written me up for it, as if I had hauled it up the hill in the night and set it there to spite the community standard. That one made me laugh out loud on my own porch, alone, with the dog looking at me sideways. You cannot fine a man for geology. I wrote her one line back by hand on a plain card. The rock predates the subdivision, and the board both, and I have the survey. To prove it, she did not answer. I kept the card's carbon and put it in the folder with the rest. The folder was getting thick by then, and every page in it was hers. I should have understood sooner what she was really after. The woodpile and the dog and the rock were noise. The fence was the thing. Here is the part you need to understand about Ren Mesa, the part that turns a petty story into a real one. Running along the upper edge of the development, behind my place and behind 2 others, There's a strip of common ground, the plat set aside as open space. It is about 4 acres. Pine, granite, a seasonal drainage that runs in spring. When I platted the tract, that strip was dedicated to the homeowners in common, in perpetuity, so the high ground along the rim could never be carved into more lots, and the view from the whole development could never be walled off. I drew it that way. On purpose, the developer agreed. It is on the recorded plat in plain ink. What I learned, slowly, through a neighbor named Calvin Boyd, was that Lorna had found a buyer for that strip. A builder out of the city wanted to put 6 luxury lots up there on the rim with their own private drive. To sell it, the board would have to vacate the open space dedication and re-subdivide the strip into sellable parcels. And to do that cleanly, Lorna needed the boundaries to say something they did not say. She needed the open space to be a little bigger, and the private lots that bordered it, including mine, to be a little smaller. About 11 feet smaller, as it happened. 11 feet, taken off the top of 3 people's land, was enough to give her builder the road frontage he needed. That is why my fence was suddenly 11 feet in the wrong place. Calvin told me this on a Thursday evening in April, standing at the edge of my drive with his hat in his hands, because Calvin is the kind of man who feels guilty bringing bad news he did not make. He is a retired propane man, 70 years old, lived on the mesa longer than I have, and he had run for a board seat that spring, mostly to have a set of eyes inside the room. He kept his cap turned around in his hands the whole time he talked, the way he does when a thing is bothering him. He had been at the board meeting 2 nights before. He had seen the renderings up on the easel, the watercolor lots, and the cheerful little drive. He had heard Lorna stand up in front of the management lawyer and the board and lay it out, Pole. The strip of open space along the upper rim, she had told them, was an underused asset. A builder had made an offer. The association could vacate the dedication, re-subdivide the rim into 6 premium lots, and the proceeds would fund the amenities the community deserved. And the only obstacle, she had said, was that the original plat was sloppy and the boundaries needed correcting before any of it could be filed. Calvin repeated her words as close as he could get them, and they were these. The man who drew the old maps is probably long dead. His work is 40 years out of date. A fresh survey will clean up decades of careless boundaries and let us move forward. The room had nodded. A couple of the lower-tier owners had even clapped. Calvin had sat there with his cap in his hands and said nothing, because he did not yet know what to say, and he had come up my drive 2 nights later, still not knowing, only knowing it was wrong, and that I ought to hear it from a friend before I heard it from a letter. Nobody in that clubhouse knew the man who drew the old maps was 3 lots up the hill, alive, 58 years old, with all his licenses current, listening to himself be eulogized second-hand on his own gravel. I thanked Calvin. I told him he had done right to come. I did not tell him one word of what I was. The time to show a man your hand is not when his blood is up, and yours along with it. The time is when the other side has committed so fully that they cannot back out without falling. So I waited, and I let Lorna commit. And commit she did. She hired her own surveyor. This is the part where a lazy story would have her simply make a false claim and wait to be caught. She did not do that. She was thorough in the way that frightened people. She paid a young surveyor named Pratt, new to the county, working out of a truck and an office above a feed store, to produce a new survey of the upper tier of Ren Mesa. She gave him the result she wanted. And to a man who did not know the country, working fast for a client who paid well, the result she wanted looked achievable. Pratt did what a surveyor short on time does when he does not want to chase down old monuments in the brush. He pulled the recorded plat, scaled the dimensions off it, and set new pins by measurement from the road, which had been widened and repaved twice since I platted the tract. He never found the original monuments. He never tied his work to them, the brass caps I had set in concrete 31 years ago, down in the duff and the pine needles, sunk and weathered and exactly where I left them. He walked right past. He set his pins where the paper scaled and stretched and shifted off a moved road, told him to, and his new pins put the open space line 11 feet downhill of where mine had always been across my fence, across 2 other fences. Right where Lorna needed it, she filed it. She took Pratt's survey to the county, attached it to a plat amendment to vacate part of the open space and re-subdivide the rim, and she set the machine in motion. She sent me the notice you heard at the start. She sent the other 2 owners theirs. She scheduled the demolition of 3 fences for the first week of June, and she scheduled a special board meeting and a county hearing to ratify the whole thing, and she invited the press, because Lorna liked a clean narrative about a tidy community correcting old mistakes. She built her case in the open, confident, fully committed. She had a stamped survey, a county filing, a buyer, a board majority, and a hearing date. By every measure she could see, she had won before I had said a word. What she had not done in all of it was check who drew the maps. I spent the second half of April in my truck and on my knees. A survey is not an opinion, and it is not a drawing. It is a chain of physical evidence on the ground tied to a record, and the oldest controlling evidence wins. The monuments I set when I platted Grand Mesa were the controlling evidence. They had been the controlling evidence the whole time. They did not stop being true because a board voted. I went and found them, every one. I started with the field book, the original, a canvas-bound thing gone soft at the corners, kept dry in a metal box for 31 years. My own handwriting from the year I platted the tract, the angles and distances and the little sketches I drew of each corner, and what I tied it to. A surveyor does not just set a monument and walk off. He ties it to permanent things around it, a particular tree, a rock cleft, a fence corner, so that if the cap is ever lost, it can be found again from the witnesses. I had written all of those, down when I was young, in a careful hand, never once thinking the man who would need the most would be me, 3 decades on, with gray in my beard and a board trying to vote my line out from under me. I want you to picture this, because it is the heart of the thing. A 58-year-old man, alone except for a healer that would not leave his side, working a tract he had not formally surveyed in 31 years, on his knees in the pine duff with a steel probe and a metal detector, and that worn field book open on the ground beside him. I would read the page. 42 feet from the scribed pine, bearing southwest, I would write 31 years ago. I would pace it off and swing the detector slow over the needles, and the detector would sing a clean high note over metal, and I would stop and kneel and dig with a trowel, slow, the way you uncover something you do not want to damage. And there it would be, a brass cap, green with age, the size of a silver dollar stamped with my license number. And, the year I set it, sitting in a collar of concrete I had mixed in a wheelbarrow before my daughter was born. Exactly where the book said. Exactly where I had left it in a younger man's morning. The first one took me half a day. The northeast corner, under a fallen limb that had come down across it sometime in the last decade, the wood half rotted into the duff. I moved the limb and probed and found the concrete on the second pass. I sat back on my heels and looked at that green cap a long time. Tilly came and put her nose on it like she understood. I do not mind telling you my eyes stung. The last hands on that cap before mine had been mine, in a year when Nora was alive and the mesa had no name and no board and no Lorna. Just a developer and a young man with a transit who believed the lines he set would mean something. They meant something now. After the first one, the rest came faster, because I trusted the book again. I found the drainage angle point by pacing from a witness tree I had scribed 3 decades earlier, an old ponderosa with a blaze grown nearly shut, the bark healed over the cut. I took out a knife and pared the bark back, careful, and there underneath was my mark, the slash and the tack, scarred over, but readable. I paced from it and found the cap. I found the south corner near the old 2-track. I found the cap that fixed the open space line itself, the one Lorna needed to move, the one her whole deal turned on, exactly 11 feet uphill of the pin young Pratt had driven, exactly where my fence had stood for 19 years of her notices. 11 feet. The same 11 feet. Only the other direction. My monument said the line was where I had always known it. Her surveyor's pin said it was 11 feet into my land. Between the two of them stood the entire question, and the law of the matter is not close. A recorded plat is controlled by the monuments the original surveyor set, not by a later surveyor's measurements scaled off a copy. The pin yields to the cap. Always. That is not my preference. That is the rule every surveyor swears to. Pratt had broken it without knowing he had because he never looked under the limb. I photographed every monument in place before I touched it. I tied them together with my own instrument, the good one, the one I keep calibrated even in retirement, out of a habit I cannot break. I wrote it all up. I had, by the first week of May, a complete retracement of the upper tier of Wren Mesa. Every original monument recovered and documented. Every one of Pratt's pins shown for what it was, a measurement that ignored the ground. I had the field book from the original survey. I had the recorded plat with my seal. And I had 19 years of Lorna's own paper, every notice, stacked in the folder I had opened. The morning she drove up my drive, I did not call Pratt. I did not warn the board. The time was not yet. The time came at the special meeting, the one Lorna had called to ratify the amendment before the county hearing. She held it in the clubhouse, the big room with the folding chairs and the bad coffee. She had the renderings on an easel, the 6 luxury lots in cheerful watercolor, the private drive, the words "New Vision for our community" across the top. She had the management company's lawyer at her elbow. She had a reporter from the regional paper in the second row. She had the 2 other affected owners there, both of them pale and angry and outmatched, because neither of them knew what I knew. She had the board behind a long table, Calvin among them, looking at his hands. I came in late on purpose and sat in the back with a banker's box on the chair beside me. Tilly, I left in the truck. This was not a place for the dog. Lorna ran the meeting, like a woman who had already won. She talked about stewardship and property values, and the responsibility to correct the careless work of the past. She put up Pratt's survey on the screen and called it the definitive, modern record. She said the original plat was a relic from a time of looser standards. She said, and the reporter wrote it down, that the surveyor who drew the old maps was surely long retired or long gone, and that his work could not be allowed to stand in the way of progress. Then she opened the floor, because she thought the floor was safe. I stood up. I said my name, the way you give it for a record, first and last, once and clearly. Gus Renner. I said I owned the parcel at the top, the one with the granite outcrop, the one whose fence the board had voted to remove. Lorna gave me the smile. She gave the woodpile and the dog. She said the board had reviewed the matter and the survey was settled. I said I would like to enter something into the record, and I walked to the front with the box. I did not give a speech. A man who has the evidence does not need a speech. I asked the lawyer at her elbow one question. I asked whether he agreed that a recorded plat is controlled by the original monuments set by the surveyor of record, where those monuments can be found. He was a careful man. He said slowly that as a general principle of boundary law, yes, original monuments control over later measurements. He did not yet know why I was asking. I laid the recorded plat on the table face up, the real one, the certified copy from the county with the recording stamp in the margin. I smoothed it flat with one hand. Then I put a finger on the surveyor's certification block down in the corner, the signature and the seal and the license number printed under it. And I turned the sheet so the reporter in the second row could see it, and I said it plainly, the way you say a thing for a record. That is my signature. That is my seal. That is my license number. I am the surveyor of record for this entire subdivision. I drew these maps. I set these corners. I am not long dead, and I am not 40 years out of date, and I am not long gone. I have been getting your association's letters about my woodpile for the better part of 2 years. I live 3 lots up from this room. The clubhouse went very quiet. The kind of quiet you can hear the coffee machine in, the urn ticking against the back wall. Somebody's folding chair creaked. Lorna's smile was still on her face, but it had stopped meaning anything. The way a light stays on in a house nobody is home in anymore. The reporter had stopped writing and started, instead, to watch. Then I opened the box. I laid out the photographs, one after another, of the brass caps in the ground, green with age, stamped with the year, each one beside a tape pulled to Pratt's new pin, each one showing the same gap. 11 feet. I laid out the field book, open to the page in my own handwriting from the year I set the first cap. I laid out my retracement, every monument recovered, every pin refuted. I set Pratt's survey beside my own, and I did not say a word about it. I let the lawyer look. I let the board look. I let the reporter take her pictures. The lawyer looked for a long time. Then he turned to Lorna and said quietly, in the voice a man uses when he has just understood that he is on the wrong side of a thing, that they had a serious problem, and that the amendment could not go forward on this survey. Lorna did not go quiet. I will give her that. She fought. She said the monuments could have been disturbed. They had not been. And my photographs of undisturbed concrete collars. She said Pratt was a licensed surveyor too, and his work was just as valid. It was not, and the lawyer was already shaking his head because a license to measure is not a license to ignore the monument that controls. She said I had a conflict of interest because the line in question was my own. I said the law does not care whose land the monument sits on. The monument controls regardless, and that she was welcome to hire a third surveyor, any surveyor in the state, and that every one of them would tie to my caps and reach my line because that is what the rules of the profession require. She said the board had already voted. I said the board could not vote a brass monument 11 feet downhill. She turned then to the front row, to a young man I had not noticed when I came in, sitting hunched with a rolled copy of his own survey across his knees. Pratt. He had gone the color of the paper in his hands. Lorna's voice climbed and she pointed at him and she told him to stand up and confirm his survey, to tell the room his work was sound, to put this nonsense to rest. Pratt stood up slow. He looked at the photographs spread across the table, the green caps in their concrete collars, the tape pulled to his own pins. He looked at them a long moment. And then he did the one thing in this whole story that earns him any credit at all. He told the truth out loud, in a low voice, in front of the reporter and the board and the client who had paid him. He said he had not found the original monuments. He said he had been working fast, that he had scaled his dimensions off the recorded plat and set his pins by measurement from the road. He said he had not known there were brass caps in the ground from the original survey, and that he should have looked, and that if those caps were where the photographs showed them, set in undisturbed concrete, then under the rules of the profession those monuments controlled, and Mr. Renner's line was correct, and his own was not. He said he was sorry. He said it to the table, not to Lorna. Then he sat back down and would not look at her. That was the moment her case died, not when I stood and gave my name, not when I laid down the plat with my seal on it. It died when her own surveyor, the man she had paid to draw the line where she wanted it, looked at the ground and told the room what the ground actually said. It was a Thursday, 6:50 in the evening. I remember because the reporter checked her watch. What followed was not a triumph in the way Lorna had planned her triumph. It was slower and heavier than that, and it landed entirely on her own terms, on the very record she had set in motion. The county will not vacate a dedicated open space on a survey that ignores the controlling monuments. The plat amendment was withdrawn before the hearing it was filed for, because the lawyer would not put his name on it, and the county had already been sent my retracement by then. The 6 luxury lots on the rim were never platted. The private drive was never cut. The strip of pine and granite at the top of the mesa stayed exactly what I drew it to be 3 decades ago. Open space for the whole development, in perpetuity where the view can never be walled off. The fences came down on schedule, all 3 of them, but not the way the notice promised. They came down because the 3 of us took them down ourselves, over a Saturday and a Sunday in June, with a borrowed post pounder and a cooler of sandwiches and Tilly running the line ahead of us like a foreman. Calvin came up to help, and so did 2 of the lower-tier men who had voted for Lorna and felt sheepish about it now, and wanted to put their hands on something honest. We pulled the old posts, and we strung a line off my recovered corners, the true line, and we rebuilt all 3 fences uphill, where my monument said they had always belonged. The other 2 owners gained back the strip that had nearly been taken. So did I. We gained land that afternoon. We did not lose an inch of it. I set a fresh cap at my own corner while we were at it, a new brass monument and a new collar of concrete, right beside the old green one. The 2 of them together in the duff, the old and the new, both stamped with the same license number. Mine. One I set as a young man with a wife on the outcrop and a tract that had no name. One I set at 58, with gray in my beard and a daughter 2 hours down the road and a board that had just learned the hard way. Who drew the maps? Same number, same line. 31 years apart, agreeing to the inch. The board removed Lorna as president at the next meeting. It was not a dramatic vote. Calvin made the motion in his flat propane man voice that the board accept the president's resignation, and she resigned rather than be removed, which amounts to the same chair empty. The room was tired of her by then, and more than that, it was frightened. Frightened by how close they had come to attaching their own names to a plat amendment built on a survey that ignored the controlling monuments. An amendment the county would have unwound and sent them the legal bill for. A board that nearly hands a stranger 6 lots of common ground learns humility fast. Once it sees the photographs, she kept her house. Nobody took her stucco, columns, or her fountain, or the guardhouse that still guards nothing to this day. The audience here is not owed her destruction, and I was not owed it either. What she lost was the only thing she had truly been reaching for: the authority to redraw other people's land, and the deal that would have paid her builder, and I came to understand, paid her a finder's arrangement on the side. The builder from the city read the county's position on the survey and walked away inside a week. There is no profit. In 6 lots, you cannot legally plat. The management company with the embossed letterhead quietly dropped the account, the way those firms do when a client becomes a liability. And the fines, the woodpile, and the dog and the 40-ton boulder, the whole 2 years of them, were voided in a single line of board minutes that Calvin read aloud at the following meeting with the ghost of a smile, while I sat in the back and said nothing, because the minutes said it for me. Pratt I did not pursue. He made his report to the licensing board himself before anyone made him, and he asked if he could come up sometime and learn how to recover old monuments in rough country, because he did not want to set a wrong pin again as long as he lived. I told him to bring a probe and a metal detector and a lunch. He came up twice that summer. He is a better surveyor now than he was, and he will be a good one, because the worst day of his young career taught him the only lesson that matters in this trade. The ground is the truth, and the paper only points to it. My daughter came home the weekend after the meeting. I told her the whole of it on the porch, with Tilly asleep across both our feet and the light going gold the way it does up there, the way it did the first evening. Her mother stood on the outcrop. She listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet a while, and then she said she had not known, until that telling, that the lines around our place and around the cemetery and around the whole mesa were lines I had drawn with my own hands. She had thought they were just there, the way you think a mountain is just there. I told her that nothing on a map is just there. Somebody walked it, somebody set a corner and wrote it down. And once it is set true and recorded, it outlasts the man who set it. And it outlasts the people who would like it to say something else. She asked if I was angry. I told her the truth, because she is old enough now for the truth. The anger had been real. The morning Lorna drove up my gravel in her white sneakers and misspelled my name on a notice, and told me a committee had voted to bulldoze my fence. I had felt it in my hands, the way you feel it. A heat in the palms, and a tightness across the jaw. I had wanted, for about a minute on that porch, to walk down the hill and say something I could not take back. I did not. Anger is the slowest tool in the box, I told my daughter, and I had a better one in the shed. I had the corners in the ground. I had the seal on the recorded plat. I had a field book in my own young handwriting and the oldest rule in my whole trade, that the true line, once set and recorded, beats the wished-for line every time the question is asked in the open. I did not need to raise my voice in that clubhouse, not once. I gave my name, and I laid down the paper, and I let the photographs speak, and they spoke louder than I ever could have. The monuments did the work. They had been doing it the whole time, silent and buried and patient under the pine needles. Through all 19 years of her notices, through the entire stretch, she stood up in front of rooms and called my maps careless, and assumed the man who drew them was dead. They were never careless. They were never hers to change. They were just waiting, the way good corners wait, for somebody to come dig them up and read them out loud. That is the lesson. And I want to give it to you plain, because it is the only thing I have to hand you that is worth more than the story. If you own land, go find your corners, walk your boundary while you are healthy enough to walk it. Find the monuments, the iron pins, or the brass caps, or the stones, and learn where they are with your own feet, and keep a copy of your recorded plat and your deed somewhere a fire cannot reach. A boundary is not what a committee says it is, and it is not what a neighbor wishes it were, and it is not what a fresh survey scaled off a moved road says it is. It is where the original monuments sit, tied to the recorded map, and the oldest controlling evidence wins every time the question is asked. Honestly, most people never look. They assume the lines are just there. The ones who look and keep the record and can put a finger on the corner in the ground do not lose their land to a clipboard and a vote. You do not have to be the surveyor who drew the maps. You only have to know where your corners are before someone tells you they have moved. If a story like this is worth your evening, stay close, because the next one is about a woman who got a letter ordering her to tear out a wheelchair ramp her late husband built from a board that did not know she sat on the zoning commission that wrote their own variance rules. Tilly is asleep on the porch again, the way she always ends up, and the light is going down gold over the strip of open ground at the top of the mesa, the 4 acres of pine and granite that will never be 6 lots, that I drew open 31 years ago, and that a brass cap in the duff keeps open still.